Hey friends, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to work on two honeybee tumblers for you guys that are just perfect for spring. So when I was thinking about this tutorial, I couldn't decide whether I wanted to do this really cute two-color ombre spray paint or if I wanted to do a more traditional ink style but in pink. So I decided, why not bring you both? So as usual, I'm starting out with a prepped and sanded tumbler. I'm using a 20-ounce skinny and a curved coffee mug. So normally, y'all know I like to put my glitter directly on my acrylic paint, but the white can sometimes be a little bit patchy underneath an iridescent glitter. So for these two, I just mixed in a tiny bit of Mod Podge to go with my white paint, just to help get a better smooth coverage for my glitter. So I'm just gonna go ahead and get these glittered up. I'm going to throw them on my turner and give them two thin coats of Speedy Petey Epoxy and a good sand, and then we're ready to go here into decals. So you can see I wrapped my mug handle with a little bit of electrical tape. It's because I want it to stay glittery, so I don't want that part to get spray painted. So I'm just going to take my honeycombs. This is actually a file that's available in my Etsy shop if you need it. I'll have it linked in the description box along with everything else you see in the video, of course. So we're just going to take these honeycombs and put them wherever feels good on the tumbler. I am going to keep in mind that I am going to put a decal on in the end, and I don't want that decal straight over honeycombs. I just want the edges of it to sort of overlap around the edges of the honeycomb. So I'm going to leave kind of a blank space, but I also am going to add just a couple of embellishments afterwards. So I just kind of leave enough room on the tumbler to do some extra work. So don't overfill it, but this is really up to you. However many you want is great. So I'm just going to go ahead and repeat that process with my larger size honeycombs and my larger tumbler. But while you see me do that, I'm going to talk to you about the spray painting. Unfortunately, it gets dark so early and I had to work on this tumbler in the evening. So I wasn't able to record the spray painting process for the ombre, but all you have to do is take your chosen colors. I used two of them. They're linked in the description box. Hold your can of paint a good distance away from your tumbler and just lightly mist. So I started with my dark color and I did the top rim and the bottom rim. And then I went back into the center with the lighter color, again, holding it a really good distance away from my tumbler. So you're getting a light mist versus a concentrated spray paint. Also, you don't want any runs or anything. So that's just like a good way to spray paint in general. So it's basically the same technique as you should be used to. You're just doing the two colors. And if you get a little too much of one or you've covered one a little too much, just go back and do another layer. You can keep going back and forth until you're satisfied. Then for our other mug, I just went ahead and used the baby pink that I already had in my hand that I had used on the first tumbler. And normally when I ink my bee tumblers, I use several colors, like 4 to 5 of oranges and yellows to get all that good veining. But for this one, I just wanted one solid color. So you can see me using this small paintbrush and I just sort of get a good base of ink all over it. Then I'm going to go back through with an almost dry brush. You can see I'm barely getting any more ink on it. And I'm just going to pounce on that, and that's going to create that texturing on the cup for us. Now, if you wanted to use several colors of pinks and reds, you could absolutely do that as well. But I just wanted to stick with this one textured paint for this one. So, like I said, get a good base of ink everywhere, and then just go back through and blot, 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 blot until you're happy with the texture that you have on it. If you choose to, after you get your inking done, you can mist it with a tiny touch of alcohol as well from a very fine mister, and that'll help kind of accentuate those like texture details. But whatever you want to do is fine. You can use any color you want. You don't even have to keep it pink, of course. Just whatever feels good. And then I'm going to go ahead and take my completely dried ombre tumbler and start pulling my decals. So there's not much to do on this one. You're just going to peel off the stencils that you already had placed. And then you can see these sort of golden honeycombs in the background there. What I did with those is I just took a sheet of double stick, like cat scratch style paper off of Amazon, and I cut some honeycombs out of that. So what I did is I set my silhouette to cut deeper and to do 2 passes. That way it would completely cut through and give me these freeform shapes. Then I took that and I peeled off one side of the backing paper and basically just tapped gold foil, gold and silver mixed foil actually, onto those. That gave me these little foiled shapes. You could absolutely do this with a sheet of foil as well. You could just take those, stick them directly on the tumbler, and then rub the sheet foil over it. But I wanted to use a loose foil for these. And I didn't want all the extra loose foil to stick to my cup, so that's why I did it that way. Then you're just going to take off the other side of the backing and just place those wherever looks good. I like to just pop a couple on here and there to accentuate, kind of as a little extra texture accent. After I got those accents placed, I did throw them on my turner for one more thin coat of Speedy Petey before we moved into our water slides. And for a little extra pizzazz, I stirred in just a tiny bit of my gold and silver foil, just so it broke up in the epoxy a little bit and left a little extra shimmer on the tumbler as well. For my water slides, I don't actually soak them in water. I don't have running water in my shop, so it's just kind of a messy procedure to do that. So I just mist them with my water mister over a paper towel, and it works perfect. So all I'm going to do is let that soak for just a couple seconds to loosen up. I'm going to spray some water directly on my tumbler so I have a nice slippy surface so I can adjust it as needed. And then I'm going to go ahead, center it on my tumbler, and I'm going to pull that backing out, and I'm going to be really careful when I pull it out to keep it as flat against the cup as possible. That way I'm not getting extra air bubbles trapped underneath it. So once I'm happy with the placement, I just take my soft silicone brush. I start from the center and push my way out. That's just making sure all the edges are laid smooth and nicely and there's no extra air or water underneath. Once I'm happy with that placement, I'm just going to dry it off with a barely damp paper towel and set it to the side to set up while I work on my honeybees. So I'm going to go ahead and attach those with just a tad of UV resin. Normally I just use a drop of super glue, but I was out, so we're going with resin today. So I do like to put a coat of epoxy over my bees. I know not everybody does, but I like to do it for two reasons. The first one is I've had bees that were very securely attached in the past pop off. Also, it ensures that there's no way any water or anything is going to get underneath the bee because they don't sit completely flush with the cup. And I don't want anything to get under there and break down my glue eventually. So I just like to have that one coat. You need to make sure though that your tumbler is ready for its final coat before you put them on, because if you start putting multiple final coats over the bees, you just kind of get too much epoxy on them. So we want to make sure we're ready for our final coat at this step. Now I'm going to go ahead and repeat the process with my honeybees on my larger tumbler. I like to use somewhere between 4 and 5 bees, usually on a 20 or 30 ounce tumbler. The one thing I will caution is I try to avoid putting any on the bottom third of the tumbler, just because if whoever purchases that tumbler wants to take it with them anywhere, they don't want to have issues sliding it in and out of their cup holder. I did put one on this tumbler that was a little bit lower than I normally like to go, but I just felt like it really needed that bee there. So hopefully whoever buys this one doesn't have a cup holder issue. You can see that I'm just putting little dabs of epoxy basically on the wings, and then I trace it around the outer edge of the body. The body does have a cavity under there, so you want to be careful not to fill that with your UV resin because it's not going to cure well under there, and you really want that completely set. You don't want any like oozy, still uncured liquidy UV resin because you are going to put a coat of epoxy over it next. So just make sure you're giving that ample time to get really good and cured. Then we're going to go ahead and get these on our turner for our final coats of epoxy. So the one thing I'm really careful about when I put my epoxy on is you don't want pooling of resin around the bees. So what I like to do is just take a small paintbrush and paint the epoxy over the top of the bees and make sure I'm getting in all the grooves around the edges. That way they're completely sealed to the tumbler. But I don't want them sitting and pooling under gobs of epoxy because then you'll get a bunch of micro bubbles and stuff and it'll just look ugly. So I went ahead and I did my bees, I did my handle, and now I'm going to go ahead and epoxy the rest of the cup as normal. So I'm going to spread that coat evenly around, and then last thing I'm going to do before I torch it is I'm going to take my finger and run it around the edges of each bee and scrape off all the epoxy I can. I know that sounds counterintuitive, but when the epoxy self-levels, it will run back there and it will give a good seal. But if you have it perfect to begin with, then you'll wind up with over pooling. So you want to scrape it away as much as possible. It's the same thing I do around the handles of my tumbler as well. You want to scrape off as much as you can, and as it settles, it's going to fill that back in for you. And of course, yet again, I'm repeating the same technique for my larger tumbler, just giving all those bees a little coat over the surface of them and around all the edges and grooves to make sure they're good and filled in. Then I'm going to put it on my turner and apply my epoxy coat as I normally would, kind of skipping around the bees a little bit. So after I get that coat good and smoothed out, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to drag my finger around the edges, pull off all the extra epoxy that I can. Like I said, I promise you it'll fill in. I know it feels wrong, but you really want to nail this final coat and have this be the last one. Because like I said earlier, if you go to put multiple final coats on, your little bees just drown in epoxy and they wind up being not quite as 3D. And also you can get a lot of micro bubbles that pool there, and that's just not a look we want. So I've pulled off my excess epoxy. I've torched it. This is actually Speedy Petey. So I'm going to let that spin for 35 minutes, and then I'm able to take it off the turner and set it to the side to finish drying. It's not fully touchable at the 35-minute mark, but it no longer needs to spin. So I can go ahead and move it and use my turner for something else. So isn't that so pretty? I just can't stop looking at these tumblers. I love them so, so, so much. After our final cure time, these are the Be Beautiful tumblers that you're left with. Do you guys see what I did there? Be beautiful. Anyway, so the She Works Hard for the Honey decal is like everything to me. I think it's so adorable. I had so much fun making these tumblers. I hope that you guys enjoyed watching this video. I can't wait to see your bee tumblers. Please make sure you tag me in them. I would love to see them. And if you're not already a member, consider hopping in my free Facebook group at A Bit of Bling Creative Community. We have tons of lives, lots of discount codes, some really great ladies, and tons of fun. So thanks so much for joining me today, and I'll catch you guys next time.